The file that changed everything was 41 pages long and written in a clerical font the Vorith used for low-priority administrative items. I know because I read it 6 times. The night Commander Yale Soren forwarded it to my quarters aboard the Unbroken Meridian, and each time I reached page 9, the appendix listing the approved corridor boundaries, I had to set the tablet down and look at the bulkhead until the feeling passed. I had spent 22 years as a colonial survey warrant officer mapping those corridors. I had filed 340 route assessments, recommended 19 colony sites, certified the navigational viability of 11 established settlements. I had believed, with the complete confidence of a man who had done the math himself, that the permitted zones were simply where the math worked, where stable FTL transit intersected with habitable systems and viable transit times. The Vorith Conclave had been content to let me believe that. Containment Notation 9 Dara, filed in the Conclave's internal registry 1,412 years before I was born, was 4 paragraphs of administrative language describing the covert suppression of human FTL corridor registrations. Beyond a boundary, the Conclave had drawn unilaterally and never disclosed. Human survey vessels that approached the boundary received automated navigational advisories, sensor ghost interference, gravitational variance warnings, transit instability flags, all fabricated, all filed in Conclave systems as routine safety notices, none of them ever triggering a review that a human agency would see. Colony ships that plotted courses outside the approved zones found those courses quietly rejected by transit relay systems the Conclave administered on behalf of a dozen species including ours. The rejection coded as standard routing optimization. 11 generations. That was the Conclave's accounting in their own internal files. 11 human generations had lived and expanded and believed they were free inside a pen the Conclave had built around us before my great-great-grandmother's grandmother was born, and they had never said a word about it, because we were, in the Conclave's internal classification, a managed emergent species, too volatile for unrestricted expansion, too useful to discard, and too unsophisticated in their estimation to notice the walls. I was 58 years old. I had given 22 years to mapping a cage. The feeling I set the tablet down to avoid was not rage. It was something older and heavier than rage, the specific grief of a man who understands in one moment that the work he was most proud of was never really his. Commander Soren did not send the file with any commentary. She didn't need to. The Joint Consolidation Command had already convened by the time it reached me, and the orders that came down 40 hours later were not a demand for explanation or a summons to diplomatic proceedings. The orders designated the operational response. They called it the Dara Reckoning. 410 warships. I want to be precise about that number because precision is what the Conclave had always used against us, and I think there is a satisfaction in returning it. 410 vessels of the Joint Consolidation Command, drawn from 6 fleet groups, assembled at Waypoint Corda over the course of 11 days. I watched them come in from the observation deck of the Unbroken Meridian, the fleet's designated command ship, a heavy consolidation dreadnought that had been in service for 30 years and bore the kind of wear that comes from work rather than ceremony. They came in formation, no fanfare, each ship filing its position report and going quiet. By the time the last squadron slotted into place, the waypoint looked like something geological, like a feature of the landscape that had always been there and simply hadn't been noticed until now. My designation aboard the Unbroken Meridian was Observer Recorder, which is a polite title for a man they wanted present for reasons that were not fully operational. Commander Soren had requested me specifically. She had read my survey files, all 340 of them, and she told me during our first meeting that she wanted someone aboard who understood what had been taken. I wasn't sure at the time whether that was strategic or whether she simply thought I deserved to see what came next. I have since decided it was both. The conclave's home arc was 14 days at standard transit. The fleet did not rush. That, too, felt like precision, like a response that had been considered rather than triggered, which is exactly what it was. The command standing communications directive for the transit was simple. One channel open to the conclave's administrative relay at all times. No message sent. No acknowledgement requested. Just the open channel with the fleet's registry codes broadcasting on it, so that anyone who wanted to know we were coming could know we were coming and have 14 days to think carefully about what that meant. On day 6, the conclave transmitted a formal inquiry. Standard diplomatic language, respectful in the way that people are respectful when they have abruptly realized they may have made a significant error in their assumptions about another species. They asked the nature of our transit. Commander Soren did not reply. The channel stayed open. The fleet kept moving. On day 9, the conclave transmitted a formal offer of reparations, a figure that was, by any reasonable accounting, substantial. They included a draft apology, 6 pages, which I was asked to read for accuracy of factual representation, and which I read once and set aside. The apology was precise about the mechanism and evasive about the scope. It did not use the phrase 11 generations. It did not mention that the humans who had filed survey reports and certified colony sites and spent careers believing they were operating in open space had been, in the conclave's own internal language, managed. Commander Soren transmitted one response. It was 4 words: dissolution, full archive, broadcast. Then the channel went back to open silence and the fleet kept moving. I spent a good deal of the transit in the survey archive bay, which is not a glamorous posting on a warship, but suited me well enough. The unbroken Meridian carried a complete copy of every colonial survey file submitted in the last 80 years, pulled for the operation because Command wanted the record present and intact. I went through a portion of my own files, not all of them, but enough. Route 7 Corda South, which I had certified as the optimal approach to the Tessevar cluster and which terminated, I now understood, precisely at the conclave's hidden boundary. Survey Report 201, recommending against expansion toward the Ardal systems on the basis of transit instability data that I had taken at face value, and which was, in its entirety, a conclave fabrication. I was not the only one. There were hundreds of survey officers whose work was in that archive, and every one of them had been handed the same invisible walls, and had mapped inside them with complete professional diligence, and had been, in the process, instruments of a containment they never consented to. That is the thing about the Vorath conclave that I think people who were not survey officers perhaps did not fully feel in the same register. It was not simply that they had capped our reach. It was that they had used us to cap it, our careful work, our honest measurements, our professional pride, and had let us believe we were making free choices about free space while feeding us the numbers that kept us inside their margin. They had not needed to force us into the pen. They had simply arranged the pen so that we would build it ourselves, one survey report at a time, and feel good about the work. On day 14, the unbroken Meridian dropped out of transit at the edge of the Vorath home arc with 409 ships behind it. One had held at the arc boundary per the command's deployment order, posted as rearward anchor, and the conclave's administrative relay began transmitting immediately. There were 11 distinct communications in the first 6 minutes. Commander Soren had them logged and held. She did not open any of them. What she did instead, she ordered the fleet to station-keeping formation at a distance the conclave could see clearly on every sensor array they operated, and she transmitted one message to the conclave's open broadcast frequency. Not their administrative relay, not their diplomatic channel, but the frequency used for public record transmissions visible to every species in the arc. The message carried the full text of Containment Notation 9 Dara, all 41 pages, including the appendices. It carried the conclave's own internal classification of humanity as a managed emergent species. It carried the list of fabricated navigational advisories, the suppressed corridor registrations, the routing rejections filed as optimization. It carried the phrase 11 generations because command had insisted on accurate accounting. It carried no editorial commentary, no demand, no ultimatum phrasing. It was simply the document, broadcast in the clear on a public record channel where any species in the region could receive and retain it, because the command's position, which Commander Soren had explained to me during the transit in terms I found both precise and deeply satisfying, was that what the conclave had done was not a secret that could be resolved privately. It was an architecture. And architectures, when they are revealed, need to be revealed completely, so that anyone who might have been planning to attempt something similar could see what the cost of the attempt looked like. 4 hours and 17 minutes after the broadcast, the conclave transmitted their dissolution confirmation, the administrative closure of Notation 9 Dara, filed in their own registry with the case number the command had specified, and the full record notation that the closure was made under external directive rather than voluntary review. Commander Soren requested and received confirmation of archive deletion across all conclave administrative systems. The verification took 9 hours because they have a great many administrative systems, and command required every one of them. I was on the observation deck when the final confirmation came through, not because I had been ordered there, but because it seemed like the right place to be. I had a copy of Survey Report 201 on my tablet, the one with the fabricated transit instability data, and I read the conclusion section one more time, the paragraph where I had written, with the confidence of a man who trusted his instruments, that the Ardal corridor was not viable for human use, and that I recommended against further survey investment in that sector. Good, clean, professional language, work I had been proud of. I deleted the file, not because the record shouldn't exist, command had the archive, but because I had carried that particular report in my personal files for 16 years, and it was time to stop carrying it. The conclave sent a final diplomatic communication as the fleet began its transit out formation. It was addressed to Commander Soren and expressed, in careful language, the conclave's hope that this matter could be considered resolved, and that future relations between our species might proceed on the basis of the newly established terms. Commander Soren forwarded it to the fleet's administrative log without reply. The Unbroken Meridian was the last ship to leave the Ark. I watched the conclave's home system shrink behind us through the observation deck viewport, and thought about the 19 colony sites I had recommended over 22 years. The people who had built their lives on those worlds, raised families, buried parents, started over, all of it inside a boundary set by a species that had decided, 14 centuries ago, that we needed to be managed. They had been wrong about a great many things, the Vorith Conclave. They had been wrong about our instruments, wrong about our archives, wrong, most significantly, about what we do when we find the walls. We don't file a complaint, we dissolve the notation, and then we make sure the galaxy saw us do it.